Hi everyone, it's QuickyBaby and welcome back to World of Tanks, and today I've got a full tank review for you of the Object 590. This will be the first ever Tier 9 premium tank inside the game, because all of the other Tier 9 vehicles are actually reward inside the medium tree, and there's not actually too many of them. You can't see unless I jump over there. There's like 8, so I love my Tier 9 reward mediums, and today I'm going to let you know about whether you should get excited of the first ever Tier 9 premium inside the game that makes bonds as well as all the big credits. The 590 has an auto reloader, so it has all of the benefits of being able to fire one by one, and then all of the benefits of being able to fire cyclically as well. And considering it's Soviet, yeah, this could be a pretty interesting tank. Now, firstly, I want to add a disclaimer, and that is that the Object 590 had its statistics significantly changed by Wargaming up to the very last minute. And unfortunately, Tanks GG hasn't updated yet. And so when you see 225, think 238. When you see 4.3 seconds intra-clip reload, think 4. 3.1 seconds aim time? No, it's just an illusion. It's actually 2.9 seconds. 0.43 accuracy? No. It's not one of the least accurate mediums. It's just a pretty inaccurate medium at 0.38. The dispersion values on the turret, 0.14 when after firing, 3.5, and the gun depression is 6 instead of 5. So, what do we have to look forward to with the 590? Well, because there's no other premium mediums inside the game, I'm just going to compare it to its tech tree brother, the T54. The T54 is a classic tank, an absolutely wonderful, fun vehicle to play. It's one of the best platooning tanks in the game, and so yeah, it should be pretty excited if the 590 can even live remotely up to it. So immediately we notice that the 590 has bad damage per minute. One of the only things that Wargaming didn't actually change about the vehicle. 2,258 pales in comparison to the T54. Things get even worse when you realize that because the 590 is a autoloader, it can't use a gun rammer. So you can't be able to improve the damage per minute of this vehicle by up to 13% if you were to put a Bond gun rammer on this. And so this means that while the T54 can get up to kind of like nearer over 3,000, the Object 590 can barely get up to 2,500 if it has a really good crew and a premium consumable. Another alarming thing about auto reloaders, as many of you will know, is that it's only one of those shells that has that reload speed. And funnily enough, this is actually an inverted autoloader or a reverse autoloader or auto reloader, which means that unlike the Italians or the American AMBT, the least shells you have in the magazine, the longer the reload takes. It's actually different. When the vehicle is completely empty, the base reload on this vehicle is 8.5, whereas when you've got 2 shells loaded, it takes 19 seconds to be able to get the third in. Accordingly, this vehicle has its okay damage per minute at tier 9, but only when it's empty. As soon as you're trying to get the third shell in to try and prepare to engage that enemy tank and be able to get that ambush off, your damage per minute that you're saving up is only 1,000. And so accordingly with this vehicle, if you can fire, you probably should. And there are so few scenarios. You'd have to be within like 1 or 2 seconds comfortably of being able to reload a shell where you would consider waiting to reload rather than just firing off. And that is when you can survive for long enough and you're not about to take a hit to be able to deliver those extra shells through saving them up. Another thing that makes this decision really tricky is the 4-second intra-clip reload. That is as long as a Char Future 4. It's as long as an Astron Rex. And you know, in actuality, I think I should just slap an Astron Rex in here, and you'll see that these vehicles are actually kind of similar in how they play out within that regard. They both have 4 seconds intra-clip. Ignore the 4.3 for reasons that I've stated. Please, please, please do take this into account, the statistics that have changed that you see on Tanks GG. And so the burst damage per minute of the Object 590 is the same as its lower tier Astron Rex premium brother. Now, the problem as well is that the 590 has a 3-round auto reloader, whereas the Astron Rex has a 4-round auto loader. And while it can't reload the shells one by one, to have like a lower tier tank that has more kind of burst potential than the 590 is very awkward. But of course, the advantage of having a reverse auto reloader like on the 590 is that after you fire those 3 shells, your damage per minute has actually capped out and you can keep firing. And so, unlike, should we say, intelligent autoloaders or autoloaders that require some skill, like the Italian ones, where you want to fully load your magazine, fire one, reload, fire one, reload, and then, oh, you've got the tank within your window of magazine damage, then dump out all your shells. This one, you just go in, you hold down your mouse button until the enemy tank dies, and you don't really have to actually think very much. So yeah, like a lobotomized version of a skilled mechanic that you have on traditional auto reloaders inside the game. The question that I want to ask is, at what point is an auto reloader not an auto reloader? When you have a 4-second intra-clip reload at tier 9 where damage per minute start to get really scary. I look at my T54, for example. My T54, and this is with standard equipment. This isn't with any fancy equipment on the T54. You could improve this if you wanted. I'm not even using a gun rammer inside a firepower slot because, of course, you can't. I can get my reload on this tank down to 5.83. That is less than 2 seconds longer than the intra-clip reload on the 430. And so take into account that the 590, even with fancy vents and a premium consumable, can only get its reload down to 7.6, whereas the T54 is going sub 6 seconds, meaning that when the 590 has dumped out its shells, it's going to have a 1.8 second disparity between how quickly it will unload compared to a traditional tech tree tank. And considering that when it's unloading, it's only got a 1.8 second advantage for those shells if it's managed to get them in with that huge reload time of 16 seconds, 0.9 for the third shell and 13.4 for the second. That's my question of this vehicle. At what point does it stop being an auto loader or an auto reloader and just be like a janky mechanic that Wargaming are trying to sell you? Luckily, however, the 590 does get a really good shell velocity at 1,480, but its premium rounds are actually AP compared to APCR. So that will give them more normalization. So it will help with bludgeoning through well-armored, well-angled targets compared to the APCR, but they've only got 268 millimeters of pen. And everyone knows what's special about the T54 is its 330 millimeters of heat pen. That's why everybody plays the T54, because you can compensate to be able to really overpower your opponents. And unfortunately, this 268 millimeters of pen still costs 4,800 a shot on the 590. So that is going to be a very expensive way to deal with heavily armored tanks and still bounce off them, unlike the T54. Another thing that's slightly annoying about this vehicle is the amount of ammo it can carry. It's not bad at 45 shells, but it does feel that later on in the game you will start to run out, because even the 50 that you get on the T54 feels awkward sometimes, and that's with the better pen that you have on the heat and not being able to have to divide your shells amongst APCR, AP, and HE, and having the awkward auto-reloader mechanic in that way as well. Okay, so let's go on to the gun handling. And remember, this is where things have changed on this tank. Remember that, you know what, I'll just like put it over here. Can I just put it over there so you can get an idea? At least that will help in some ways. That's good. I like that. So the aim time down to 2.9 seconds, as you can see. Still way worse than the T54. The accuracy actually now better than the T54 at 0.38. The dispersion values, however, on this vehicle, horrible when moving at 0.25. And Wargaming have made the dispersion values when you turn the turret better at 0.14, but still way worse than the T54 and horrendous compared to the Astron Rex. The gun depression is equal to the T54 at 6 degrees, but all in all, I can tell you the gun handling on this tank feels really bad for a tank that only has 320 alpha damage. And I can tell you, this gun on the T54, this is the wild gun that has the worst gun handling as well. It's not the gun that used to lead on towards the T62A, and there's probably one of the weaker aspects of the T54, and it makes up for it with that impressive heat pen. So now onto the mobility of this vehicle. 52 forwards, not exactly special. 20 backwards is pretty good. Power to weight is okay, considering the ground resistances, but you do feel slower than the T54 because it doesn't have that extra grunt in the engine. So it's not a sluggish medium by any means, but it's not a fast medium. Now, this is the real disappointing thing for me with the Object 590. When you saw it, you probably thought, oh, well-angled Soviet armor looks absolutely awesome. But that's just not the case. 110 on the front of the hull, 85 on the side, 200 on the front of the turret, 130 on the side. Just worse than the T54 in pretty much all areas apart from over-angling the side armor. And when we take a look at this armor model, you'll see that it just really doesn't do it. Now, it does against this poor penetration of 225. This was the unbuffed pen. Remember, it's gone up to 238. But look what happens as soon as you deal with proper tier 9 and tier 10 pen. Yeah, your whole tank just goes green, which means that the Object 590, it can kind of be a well-armored tank when it's in a nice matchup, but it definitely can't when it's in an equal and a worse tier matchup. As soon as you've got tier 8s with good gold pen, your armor is meaningless. As soon as you're against 9s and 10s with decent regular rounds or access to gold, your armor is meaningless. Let me clarify the conclusion on this tank, that the armor is meaningless outside of a nice matchup. And it really does struggle compared to a T54 within that regard, which is one of the most fun aspects of the tank. Luckily, it does have a big old amount of hit points, 1,800 to make up for this. Its ammo rack is a bit more healthy than the T54, so you won't be exploding. But unfortunately, the vehicle has 380 meters view range, which means that free-to-play players out there are going to struggle with being able to achieve a decent spotting distance. Oh, and I should also add that it has a much higher chance to be set on fire through engine damage than the T54. All in all, statistically on the 590, if I might be so bold, the T54 looks like the way better tank, and considering that's a tech tree vehicle, alarm bells should be ringing for you. When I say it's a tech tree vehicle, it's an old school tech tree vehicle. Now on to the most annoying thing about the 590, and that is the crew above me. This is an auto reloader, which I guess would have the mechanic in the back, which replaces the loader. However, as it stands in World of Tanks, when you replace the loader, you don't have to replace the crew skills. And unfortunately, the commander has to do the loading and the gunner has to do the loading, which means that if you want to have intuition, it's very frustrating on this vehicle. But intuition on this tank is practically useless because you're trading 3 shells for the quick reload of 1. So I would never recommend having intuition on this vehicle unless you have like an 8 or 10 skill crew. However, sacrificing adrenaline rush to improve the vehicle's poor damage per minute and sacrificing especially safe stowage on a Soviet vehicle which gets ammo racked quite a lot is definitely more of a painful thing. Another annoying thing is that you're just going to be missing out on crew training your loader for your Soviet tier 10s. And so you're going to not be as efficient for your 430 or your 140. Why Wargaming keep putting in these vehicles where they don't just put a loader in it just for continuity is beyond me. But who knows, maybe they'll be fixing it with Crew 2.0. Crew skills wise, your commander is very important, needs situational awareness, needs recon, repairs, concealment, brothers in arms. That means you need 5 before you're even remotely competitive, and that's without having things like firefighting, eagle eye, or some of the other loader skills. For the gunner, I would definitely recommend Deadeye on a Soviet tank, brothers in arms, repairs, concealment, snapshot to help the gun handling, designated target. You need a really good crew. And on the driver, definitely recommend smooth ride. You must have smooth ride on this vehicle because it's horrible dispersion values when it's moving. Brothers, repairs, concealment, probably preventative maintenance for those engine fires, off-road driving to help the ground resistances. It's not the fastest of medium, probably firefighting as well. Again, look at me saying you need a 7 skill crew before your tank is even competitive, right? Equipment wise on this vehicle, as it doesn't have a gun rammer, it's pretty easy. I'm going to be using vert stabs, I'm going to be using vents, and I'm going to have 2 builds on this tank. One is going to be a turbo. Some of you might want to end up taking bounty hardening instead, or even bounty aiming if you want to focus on the firepower. So make your decision. Do you want to be reasonably fast? Take the turbo. Do you want to be able to brawl? Take the durability. Do you want to focus purely on firepower and you're going to snipe in this tank with its APCR rounds? Take the aiming device. For the second build on this vehicle, I would personally focus on having a vision build where I'm going to be taking vents, commander's vision system, and I'm going to be taking an exhaust. And then this leads on into the field mods on this tank. Now let me clarify, because this is the first time I've actually been able to play like a premium tank on my main account that's come out before the NDA is over, because I waited till today to make sure I really tested out the vehicle with the new statistics, so I could give you a real tank review rather than just rushing it when the NDA was actually lifted on Tuesday, I believe. So it means that I haven't actually got all the field mods yet, but I know which ones I'm going to pick. Accordingly, firstly, you want to take module durability increase, so when you are ammo racked, it's not the end of the world and your gun handling is better. Next, you want to take accuracy on this vehicle, but keep in mind, if you do this, that horrible dispersion that you have on the movement and the hull traverse is going to get worse, but you can't make the accuracy worse on this tank. It'd be crazy. Next up, I'm personally going to take the concealment on this vehicle to be able to improve it. You can actually get up to nearly 40% concealment when moving with an exhaust, which is pretty wild. Then I'm going to be taking the scouting slot for the bonus slot, so you can be able to put your vents in there for your main build, and then maybe the turbo in there as well for the, if you're not using bounty for the first build. And for the second build, I'm going to be putting vents with the vision system and then hopefully a bounty exhaust. For the final field mod, this is actually a bit of a tricky one. I am going to actually lower my top speed, and I'm going to take the view range on my main account where I have good cruise skills and I have a premium consumable, because it means I can go to 456 meters view range, which is much better than 442. If you're a free-to-play player, I would recommend doing this as well. It might mean that you can just drop the premium consumable altogether without having horrendous view range on this vehicle. However, if for some reason you're somebody who wants to use coated optics, then maybe go the other way. But for me, it doesn't really make sense to not just take this field mod and then slap a turbo on it and forget about the coated optics on this vehicle. That would be a far better way of doing it, if of course using a premium consumable. This is like a flex pick, and as a rule of thumb, you want to get your view range up to at least 445 meters. Obviously having more is better, but it starts to have diminishing returns past 445 meters. And remember, with a vision system with 445, you're still going to do well on those spotting maps. So if you, all I'm saying is, don't tank your view range down to 429 unless you're willing to take a coated optics build for your spotting build. And I just feel like that's such a wasted slot when you could just lower the top speed and then take a turbo to compensate on maps which you need to be faster. But anyway, I think that's quite enough jibber jabber on the 590. Let's get stuck into some gameplay.
Okay, so firstly we are rolling out in a pretty nice matchup against tier 9 and tier 8 tanks on the cliff map. And when I'm playing the Object 590 here, it's... The thing that I've struggled with this vehicle is it doesn't really have any individual strengths. It's not an autoloader that can provide burst damage. It's not a high damage per minute medium tank that really wants to just get involved in a fight and can quickly outtrade and grind down its opponents. It's not a vehicle which has incredible armor to go and sit in a hull down position, for example, and it's not the fastest tank so that it can contest the early positions. And so I do feel in this tank that when I've been advancing into positions that I have been taking risks. For example, yesterday during my testing of this vehicle, I tried to contest the hill on the Tundra map. And to say it didn't go well is an understatement. I basically got caught trying to make a push-up by faster autoloaders, Charfu Tier 4s to be exact, that managed to get there. And so I feel like I've really struggled in this tank in trying to find out where is going to be the optimal place to play it on the battlefield. It does play a little bit like a T44-100 within that regard. It's just a shame that, unlike on the T44-100, which is at tier 8, and arguably has better damage per minute than this vehicle will have tier for tier, especially when it gets a gun rammer on, and also the 1 degree of gun depression, this thing does feel quite awkward. I'd like to highlight just how poor this gun does sometimes feel. Now, 0.38 accuracy, it's not the worst thing you're ever going to play with in World of Tanks, but just that intra-clip reload of 4 seconds to deal 320. Now, don't get me wrong, doing 320 damage every 4 seconds is incredible. If it didn't have that monster reload after it's managed to deal that damage, or have a huge reload to be able to prepare itself to be able to do that 960 burst, albeit in 8 seconds, this thing would be crazy OP. Even if there was a tier 10 medium tank with this kind of flexibility, with a 4-second natural reload, I think it would be broken. The closest you can get, I guess, is the K91, which I believe is getting, if you were to put really fancy equipment on the K91, you could probably get it down to about 4.8 seconds reload, I believe. So this thing definitely still really good damage within the burst, but it's not so good that it feels otherworldly. It's not so good that it truly feels like an autoloader. You think you got a Borask dealing 360 damage every 2 seconds, albeit it only has 2 shells compared to 3. But I don't know about you, but I would far rather deal 720 damage in 2 seconds at tier 8 than have to do 960 over 8 seconds at tier 9. So I guess then it comes down to the other aspects of this tank and whether they excel more than, say, the aspects of a Borask excel, right? And there's no doubt that this vehicle does have better gun handling, I'd say, all in all, apart from that horrible movement dispersion, than a Borask, and way better armor. Inside a matchup like this thing's armor can actually count for something. But that's really something that I also want to highlight on this tank, is that it feels oh so different with how it plays when it gets into a nice matchup against tier 8s and tier 7s compared to when it gets into its tier 10 matchup. That's something I'm going to show in the gameplay in just a little bit. But really, I didn't expect how much better this vehicle feels as a medium tank playing against low tier vehicles. There are some medium tanks in the game where I don't really care what kind of a matchup I get into. Char Future 4, for example, at tier 9. It's not a premium tank because this is the first in the game, but it is a reward vehicle. When I'm in a Char, it doesn't really matter what's shooting at me. Sure, the Char can achieve still, at times, about 200mm of effective armor when it's using its gun depression and keeping its turret at the max of its 7.5 degrees of gun depression. That's only really going to work against tier 7s. This thing's armor is more like about 230 effective, maybe 240 effective. But that will work against tier 8s, but it's not going to work against 8s firing gold, or 9s with decent standard pen, or 10s with just any kind of round. Every single tier 10 tank just goes through this thing like it's free. And then more often than not, you'll find that the Basante on the enemy team is actually electing to fire gold with its 270, that would be nice, 720mm of pen. No, it's 270mm of pen. And that is more than enough to contest the front of this vehicle. And just like that, almost instantly, this 1,800 hit points this vehicle has is now not looking too healthy. And now I feel awkward even fighting this ST1. When he's exposing the whole of his side, it's not too bad. But I really have to now try and switch out to the gold rounds to have 268mm of pen. And this would be, oh, such a great opportunity to be playing a T-54, right? I don't really feel that the autoloader is giving us a tremendous advantage now. In fact, watch the entirety of this game and the subsequent moments that I want to highlight and get an idea of, does that 4-second intraclip reload really make all that much of a difference compared to the 6-second? And how awkward it is to fire like that a couple seconds before your shell would have gone in, lose an entire round which took 9 seconds or 10 seconds to reload in this vehicle, if not longer, as well as also losing that first shell that you had. Now, it doesn't really matter so much because of, again, the inverted auto reloader on this vehicle and the fact that you do have that base reload of 8.5 seconds, which does go down if you're using a premium consumable and vents. However, just unable to be able to improve that any further with the gun rammer. So what I'm trying to highlight here is this auto reloader actually an advantage on the tank? Or does it actually feel a little bit cumbersome? Now, of course, it is going to be an advantage when you're loaded, but not so much of an advantage when you're loaded. It's definitely not an advantage once you've unloaded compared to equal tier tanks. And now I'm just wishing that I was in like a T-54. I'm wishing I had that better turret armor. I'm wishing I had that better frontal hull armor. Not the better side armor though, so you can over-angle this vehicle. Although still, when it's only 85mm thick, you can't really over-angle and get away with much unless you're dealing with tier 7s. Really, the strength of these Soviet mediums is hoping that your opponents are going to auto-aim at you, kind of over-angle the hull at the front, and then reverse. It's one of the tactics that I've always used in the T-54. That was definitely putting my life on the line there, and oh dear, talk about my life on the line. We are down to 38 hit points as the GW Tiger manages to get a clean shot around the rock. I'm going to ping the map pretty much where the artillery was, maybe to give my team a little bit of knowledge, or to give my artillery a little bit of knowledge if he wants to take a swing at them. So far, just pretty normal stuff here, really. I haven't blocked very much, although I guess I haven't been using my armor that intelligently, even though we're in a nice matchup. I've done a fair amount of damage. I don't feel like I've done any more damage than another tier 9 medium tank would have done here. And in fact, I think I'm probably down on damage that if I was playing something like a Patton and I was spamming gold. And considering how we've seen the armor worked, I'd say almost the Patton has comparable turret armor to this vehicle. When you've got 10 degrees of gun depression. Yeah, I know which one I'd rather be playing. And so, the Object 590, I do feel like it's a bit of a tank that has kind of like an identity crisis. Doesn't know what it wants to be. Feels to be very conflicted to me, it doesn't have the flexibility that you can have on other medium tanks. If we go through the reward list, Scharfgewehr 4, Kampfpanzer, even I'd say the T-55A is just a raw firepower tank. I'd say this tank is more flexible than the T-55A, as it does have 6 degrees of gun depression and not 5. But that T-55A, the gun handling and the accuracy are something else to be able to compare, to combine with the vehicle's 330mm of heat pen. And so I kind of wonder with this vehicle what Wargaming are trying to achieve. And I think, realistically, Wargaming's strategy with premium tanks is when they add one in, like a new one. When they add a new Tier 9 premium in, and when I say new, I mean of its class. So the first heavy tank, the first medium tank, which is this one, the first tank destroyer. I feel that they don't want them to be very competitive, which is fine. I would rather have underpowered Tier 9 premiums in the game than overpowered, because people want to play those Tier 9 premium tanks. They want to make bonds, they want to make credits. And the worst thing that could happen is if Wargaming released overpowered Tier 9 premium tanks, because you know everybody's going to get them, and then the matchmaker would be ruined. And Tier 9 is one of the most important tiers. I'd feel like it's the last tier that I truly enjoy, I think, in World of Tanks, that doesn't feel like it's been ruined by overpowered vehicles. Although Wargaming have been doing some good stuff at Tier 10 recently, with some of the nerfs, and I hope that they continue to nerf vehicles and not unnecessarily buff tanks just to bring them back into the meta. But I digress, that's a different matter. But it does link on to my main point, and that is that I really don't want Wargaming to release overpowered Tier 9 vehicles. It's one of the last parts of the game that I truly enjoy, but I do feel conflicted that even though I don't want Wargaming to release overpowered Tier 9 premiums, I do feel like a tank like this, they're trying to push so hard to give it a gimmick, to make it exciting, that I just feel like this tank has an identity crisis. It's not an autoloader, clearly not. It has a 4-second intra-clip reload. It has none of the major benefits of being an autoloader. It doesn't have the firepower capacity of a T-54. It doesn't have the armor of a T-54. It doesn't even have the grunt in the engine of a T-54. It has an awkward amount of view range, 380. So you can see on my minimap, this is with recon, situational awareness, vents, and a premium consumable. And you can see that I'm still not quite able to get up to 445 meters. Albeit this is without the final field mod on this tank, which, as I've recommended to you, if you take the final field mod, that you'll be able to sacrifice 2 kilometers an hour of top speed to be able to gain a bit of view range, which I think frees up the slot from needing coated optics to use a turbo, which is better. I would rather have 460 meters view range or 455 meters view range and use a turbo and sacrifice 2 kilometers an hour, which will actually result in a net gain of 3, than having to use the optics in the slot and go up to 480 meters view range, which I feel is not going to provide me as much benefit. So just all in all, this game showed you that this vehicle can be quite proficient at decent distances. Doesn't have the worst of guns now that Wargaming have buffed it up, but I do feel that it doesn't feel like a rewarding experience. You do feel like you have to mother that gun, you have to nanny that gun, you have to nurse that gun. It doesn't feel as if you have a great tool for the job, and frankly, I'd rather play other premium tanks at its tier, or not premium tanks, reward tanks for mediums at its tier. So look, I could play a bunch of games, cherry pick some rounds where the Object 590 does well, and the Object 590 does well when it's playing against tier 7 and tier 8 opponents that don't fire gold and can't pen its armor, and when it just gets to dump rounds on vehicles that pretty much every vehicle would do well in this scenario. I joked about on stream when I played that game live, the one that you just saw, that every other tank could have done that. Honestly, I do feel a little bit as if I could highlight that game. I could highlight the 1,400, 1,500 ace tanker it was with the 5 kills and the high caliber damage and everything. But realistically, the armor didn't make a difference. The autoloader didn't make a difference. You could have had a tier 8 tank in that position, and I do feel that a tier 8 tank, outside of the amount of hit points that the Object 590 had, that extra bit of durability to stay in the game for a little bit longer, wouldn't have really... the tier 8 tank would have done exactly the same thing. So I don't think that the previous game proved any kind of strength of the 590. And now you're going to see just how frustrating this turret armor is. You just can't expose it. You just go straight through the front. We can see that the enemy team have given us googly eyes with one heat round towards the left and one towards the right of the vehicle. And that's it. My hit points, I've squandered them. Now, I shouldn't have poked against the 268. Do not buy this thing thinking that it is a Soviet medium tank that is going to go hold down inside a matchup that is not against tier 7s and tier 8s, or against tier 8s that fire gold. Because if you do, you'll end up being very disappointed with this vehicle. And honestly, I'd say that this is undoubtedly the biggest disappointment for me on this vehicle, is that even if you end up using your gun depression on this vehicle, you have to be literally using the max of it, otherwise your hull armor is penetratable from the front, and that turret armor just doesn't really hold up against anything, especially the mantlet on this vehicle. So if you end up fighting this tank, and you have about 250 pen, just shoot it straight in the mantlet and you're going to laugh at it. All right, so with that said, now we're going to be rolling out again in a nice matchup. Please keep that in mind, that I'm not trying to just show you this tank's nice matchups and sweep under the carpet the realities of the armor that this thing has. But we're going to go on the assault on the Steppes map. And it's quite interesting because I just, on a map like this, I don't really know where to take this tank. I don't have the gun depression or really the sneakiness with my view range. I do have fairly good camo on this tank to go and chill up there and to try and wait for my opponents to advance. So I want to get forwards. I want to try and provide some vision for my team. And I do think that medium tanks like this need to get forwards and play aggressively. That's how I managed to make the T-54 work. And I think that as soon as you start to doubt yourself in a Soviet tank, it all comes tumbling down. I think one of the strengths of Soviet vehicles is just their sheer belief that they're going to get through the situation. You know, it's that kind of almost courage of a Soviet tank. And unfortunately, with this vehicle, it doesn't have too many reasons to be courageous that kind of justify it. Now, we do manage to dump out a huge amount of damage there against the Borsig, catching him ill-prepared. We take a big old hit in return, and I was very happy to bounce that 704. Probably off the upper hull, which I had over-angled when I was reversing. Trying to see where the Borsig shell went in, but I digress. I should focus on what's at hand. And that is that we got forwards, we got our payoff against the Borsig, and now I'm just wondering, how do I fight the Object 704 in this scenario? I have 320 alpha damage. I have a really long reload. What am I meant to do? Am I meant to just try and not fight here and not sit in front of them and just try and like work my turret armor on the ridgeline? We can see just how well my my turret armor ended up working against that 704. Looks like they actually ended up overmatching the top of this tank, which looks like a giant bird splat. So with a traditional autoloader, you go up on the ridgeline, you fire off your mag, hoping that they miss, and then you fall back. But this vehicle can't really do that unless I sit still for 15 seconds afterwards to gain 2 shells and then go up and then sit for 4 seconds between them to engage the 704 with my poor gun handling as well. Then what do I do? So I'm going to try it. I'm thinking, okay, how do I make this tank work? How do I use it to outtrade my opponents? Okay, this is silly. I can't wait for the 3rd shell. I've got to go after the 2nd shell. This is ludicrous. This can't be how you have to play this tank. You have to wait for like half a minute and then go up and fire 3 shots in 8 seconds. But I did decide that I wanted to fire a little bit early there because I just can't keep waiting in this scenario. And oh my word, I was just frustrated. I'm not going to lie. I waited 8.5 seconds for the 1st shell, 15 seconds for the 2nd shell. Even with improved cruise skill, that's still going to be over about 20 seconds that I had to wait. And now if I go up and I fire again, I'm going to be interrupting all of the progress to be able to fire 1 shell. And I do. I guess in that scenario, I should wait for like an extra couple seconds to then be able to fire off. But remember, whenever you don't fire on reload on this vehicle, or should I say fire on an opportunity to penetrate a shot on this tank, then you're giving up that vehicle's main strength, which I guess is its single shot unloaded damage per minute, which is much worse than a T-54. In a T-54, I'm firing sub 6 seconds. This vehicle is significantly over 7 seconds with its reload, with its lack of gun rammer. And so I really want to highlight that how important that fight was for me in figuring out this tank. And that is that it's not an autoloader. It can't really just wait and then go up and then fire a couple of shells and fall back. It's not a Borask within that regard, and it doesn't behave well in that scenario. But the problem is the capacity to save up 3 shells and then deliver them in 8 seconds really that much better than playing a T-54, which doesn't have to wait to save up 3 shells, and then it could deliver 3 shells in under 12 seconds. Now, don't get me wrong, it's probably more about closer to 11.5, I think, the T-54 could fire, especially if you were to have decent equipment. So my question is that 3-round burst of 8 seconds really that much better than having to make all of those sacrifices compared to a T-54 that could fire 3 rounds in 11.5 seconds, but then afterwards keeps firing sub 6 seconds compared to this tank's like 7.8? It's just not worth it. And that is one of my biggest conclusions about this tank, is that it's only an autoloader by kind of name. I honestly feel like Wargaming are just slapping it on as a gimmick. Now, if this vehicle had 3.5 seconds intra-clip reload, okay, we'd be talking. If it had 3 seconds intra-clip reload, oh yeah, this thing would be pretty gnarly within that regard. But at 4 seconds, and literally until yesterday when a micro patch was released, I think it was going to be 4.2 or 4.3 seconds. You know, what stage is it not an autoloader? I feel like this tank has an identity crisis, and I feel that Wargaming have tried so hard to make this tank feel novel or to make it feel different. And really, I feel like it's just smoke and mirrors. The bottom line for me is that when you think of a T-54 and what makes a T-54 special, it's the mobility, it's the armor, and it's the heat pen and the DPM, right? This tank has none of those. It has a bit of burst, but I don't feel like the burst outweighs the sacrifice of the relentless damage per minute. It has that burst damage also replaces the fantastic gold rounds that you'd have on a T-54, and the lack of the armor on the turret especially just kills all of my enjoyment for this vehicle. It's even more crazy when we think that the T-54 has the worst win ratio of any tech tree medium tank, although when we take into account win rate difference, the T-54 does jump up a few spots. So taking this into account, and how I do feel that the Object 590 is just a worse T-54, I don't think we have to be Mystic Meg to predict where the win ratio of the Object 590 is going. And so I really hope that I'm not putting Wargaming in an impossible position here. I know I don't want overpowered tier 9 premium tanks, but when the vehicles just feel that they've been stripped of all of the fun and essence that make a tank like the T-54 exciting, and clearly I just showed that the T-54 isn't overpowered, I would have rather that they just put a premium T-54 inside the game. It would have been a much more fun experience. But honestly, in the last year, I feel like I'm losing my faith in Wargaming actually doing what they're best at, and that is releasing exciting tanks that I would end up wanting to play. This just isn't one of them, which is so bizarre because the Char Future 4 is possibly my favorite tank in the game. It's tier 9, it's reward, not premium, albeit it has the same intra-clip reload, but yet its new Soviet brother and the first premium on the block just doesn't scratch any of the itches that a vehicle like that could provide. And so all in all, my conclusion about the 590, this has been a horrible release. Wargaming didn't know what the statistics were going to be up until the final hurdle. I apologize that my tank review has been delayed, but I hold the integrity of my tank reviews above just the necessity of getting them out as quickly as possible, especially on a tank like this that is not obvious at all, and you might look at it thinking, whoa, this thing looks really exciting. It's really not. It's a generic whatever tank with an identity crisis that has none of the feeling
that a T-54 would give you. Add to this to the fact that Wargaming are releasing it in loot crates, which are possibly some of the worst value loot crates I've seen in World of Tanks history, that unless you're a tank collector who already has vehicles like the Gonzalo, the CS-52 Lease, the VK, and the Turtle, that you're already possibly having to pony up 200 boxes before you get access to the new vehicles like the Miel or the Object 590. It's ludicrous. I cannot believe there's a gaming company out there that won't just take £30 for, frankly, what is a bunch of trash pixels in the game, rather than forcing its community to have to purchase up to 300 different boxes if they're not a tank collector and they already have some of the premiums, to be able to get, frankly, a mundane, mediocre tank that is far less interesting than vehicles that have already been in the game for the last 12 years. Anyway, ladies and gents, boys and girls, that was my tank review for the Object 590. Really hope you enjoyed this tank review today. And again, apologies, it was a little bit late, but I really hope it was useful for you. If it was, give it a thumbs up. If you hated it, give it a thumbs down. And if you're watching this video as it goes live on Friday, I'm going to be going live all day on twitch.tv/QuickyBaby. And come and let me know what you think about the Object 590, or leave a comment down below. Have you already got one? Have you played it? Did you like it? Did you not like it? And as always, thank you so much for watching. You've been epic, and hopefully I'll see you soon.